March 6, 2026. The very first day of the Formula One season in Australia. Brand new regulations. Brand new engines. And for the first time ever, Red Bull running their own Ford power unit. But what happened to Max Verstappen on this first day shocked the entire paddock. Because the reigning champion drove out of the pit lane, and suddenly his Red Bull stopped. Completely dead. Right at the exit. For more than 20 minutes, the RB22 sat in the garage while Ferrari, Mercedes, and McLaren kept running laps and gathering data. And when Verstappen finally returned to the track, things got even worse. Pushing through one of the fastest corners in Melbourne, the rear of the Red Bull snapped. Grass, gravel, pieces of the floor flying off the car. By the end of the session, the reigning world champion was only 6th fastest. Behind Ferrari, behind Mercedes, and even behind McLaren. But the real shock came after the session ended. Because Verstappen revealed something about the new Ford-powered RB22 that nobody expected to hear from a reigning champion. According to him, Red Bull might not have the fastest car on the grid anymore. And if that statement is true, it could completely change the balance of the 2026 championship. Because for the first time in years, Red Bull might be starting a season from behind. And once you understand what Verstappen revealed about the RB22 after this chaotic first day in Australia, you will see why many teams in the paddock suddenly believe the season could become one of the most unpredictable championships in modern Formula One. The moment the cars rolled out onto the Albert Park circuit, something already felt different about this season. Not just because it was the first race weekend of the 2026 championship, but because Formula One had entered a completely new era. New regulations, new energy systems, new power units that change how these cars behave on every single corner exit. And for Red Bull, the change was even bigger than for anyone else. Because this season marks the beginning of a completely new chapter for the team. For years, Red Bull built its success around Honda power. Now that era is over. The RB22 is powered by something entirely new. The Red Bull Ford engine. A power unit designed from scratch for the 2026 regulations. And building a Formula One engine from zero is one of the most difficult challenges in motorsport. Even for a team as successful as Red Bull. That is why, even before arriving in Melbourne, Max Verstappen had already lowered expectations slightly. He admitted something that surprised many people in the paddock. The RB22 might not be the fastest car on the grid right now. Not Ferrari, not Mercedes, and not even McLaren. According to Verstappen, the team was proud of the new engine because it worked reliably during testing. But the complete package was still far from perfect. The car still needed understanding. Still needed balance. Still needed development. For a driver who has dominated entire championships, those words carried a lot of weight. But when the first practice session began in Melbourne, the Red Bull did not look weak at all. Ferrari started the day very strong. Charles Leclerc quickly set the fastest lap early in the session. Lewis Hamilton followed closely behind. The Ferrari looked smooth, very comfortable with the new regulations. But Verstappen was still right there in the fight. He finished the first session in 3rd place. The RB22 looked stable through the fast corners of Albert Park. No major reliability issues. No dramatic balance problems. From the outside, everything looked relatively normal. In fact, considering that this was the first race weekend with a completely new engine, the session looked promising for Red Bull. But Formula One weekends rarely reveal their true story during the morning session. The real picture usually starts to appear later in the afternoon. When teams begin pushing harder. Fuel loads drop. Soft tires appear. Drivers start chasing qualifying lap times. That moment always reveals which cars truly have pace. And for Red Bull, that moment would suddenly turn the entire day upside down. The second practice session in Melbourne began like any other Friday afternoon in Formula One. Cars leaving the garages. Engineers watching the first telemetry numbers appear on their screens. Drivers slowly building confidence with a track that always evolves during the day. At that moment, nothing suggested that Red Bull was about to experience one of the most chaotic sessions of the entire grid. Because when the green light appeared at the end of the pit lane, Max Verstappen did exactly what he always does. He left the garage. The RB22 rolled smoothly down the pit lane. Everything looked normal. Then suddenly, the car stopped. Completely stopped. Right at the pit lane exit. For a few seconds, nobody inside the paddock understood what had happened. The reigning world champion sitting in a motionless Red Bull while the rest of the grid continued driving past on the track. Marshals quickly approached the car. Engineers watched nervously from the garage. And within moments, the RB22 had to be pushed back inside the garage. A technical issue had appeared before Verstappen could even start his first proper lap of the session. In Formula 1, losing time in practice is always frustrating. But losing more than 20 minutes during the first race weekend of a brand new regulation era? That is extremely costly. Because right now, every team is still learning. Learning how the new electrical systems behave. Learning how the tires react under the new power delivery. Learning how the car manages energy across an entire lap. And while Ferrari, Mercedes, and McLaren were collecting valuable information on track, Red Bull was sitting inside the garage trying to solve a problem. More than 20 minutes passed before Verstappen could finally return to the circuit. But by that moment, the session had already entered its most important phase. The qualifying simulations. Fuel loads dropping. Soft tires appearing. Drivers pushing their cars closer to the limit. This is the moment when the real pace of every car begins to appear. Verstappen immediately tried to recover the lost time. He pushed harder, lap after lap. But something about the RB22 still looked slightly nervous. Small steering corrections. The rear moving a little more than usual. Nothing dramatic yet. Until the moment everything suddenly went wrong. Approaching one of the fastest corners of Albert Park, Verstappen attacked the corner aggressively. Exactly the way he always does. For a brief moment, the car looked perfectly balanced. Then the rear stepped out. A sharp snap of oversteer. Verstappen reacted instantly, fighting the steering wheel to save the slide. But the car was already drifting wide. The Red Bull ran across the grass. Then straight into the gravel trap. Dust exploded behind the RB22 as it bounced violently through the runoff area. And as the car crossed the gravel, something even worse happened. Pieces of the floor started flying off the car. Small fragments of carbon fiber scattering across the circuit. Now to many fans watching the session, this looked like a simple mistake. But in Formula 1, the real damage happens underneath the car. The floor is one of the most important aerodynamic components. It generates a huge percentage of the car's downforce. If that floor is damaged, the entire balance of the car changes instantly. Grip disappears. Stability disappears. And lap time disappears with it. Which means that even after Verstappen returned to the track, the RB22 was no longer performing at its full potential. And yet, despite everything that happened, when the session ended, Verstappen still managed to finish only 0.6 away from the fastest lap of the day. A small detail that immediately caught the attention of engineers across the paddock. Because if the Red Bull could stay that close after losing 20 minutes, damaging the floor, and running a broken session, then the true pace of the RB22 might still be hiding somewhere inside the data. And that possibility is exactly why the first day of the Australian Grand Prix became far more interesting than anyone expected. But the most important moment of the day did not happen on the track. It happened after the session ended. Inside the Red Bull garage. Because once the mechanics finished inspecting the damaged floor and the engineers started reviewing the telemetry, Max Verstappen revealed something that immediately changed the tone of the entire conversation around the RB22. He was not angry. He was not blaming the car. Instead, he was extremely direct about the situation. According to Verstappen, the team already knew before arriving in Australia that the RB22 would not start the season as the fastest car on the grid. That statement alone was enough to surprise many people in the paddock. For years, Red Bull arrived at the opening race as the reference. The car everyone else had to chase. But this time, the situation looks different. Because the RB22 is not just another evolution of the previous car. It is a completely new machine. New aerodynamic philosophy. New suspension layout. And most importantly, a completely new power unit developed together with Ford. That level of change means something very important for the team. Learning. Learning how the engine interacts with the chassis. Learning how to manage the electrical deployment across a full lap. Learning how the balance of the car changes when the battery energy is used aggressively. Those are things that no simulation can fully reproduce. They only become clear once the car is running on track. And that is exactly why the first day in Australia was so valuable for Red Bull, even if the results did not look perfect on the timing screens. Because inside the data, the engineers began to notice several interesting details. The RB22 still showed competitive straight-line speed compared to Ferrari and Mercedes. The cooling system of the Ford power unit appeared stable. And despite the chaotic session, Verstappen still finished less than 0.7 away from the fastest lap of the day. Those numbers tell a very different story than the 6th position on the leaderboard. They suggest that the real performance of the RB22 might still be hidden. Hidden behind a messy session. Hidden behind a damaged floor. Hidden behind 20 minutes lost in the garage. And that is exactly why Verstappen sounded calm after the session. Because from his perspective, the real weakness of the car may not be speed. It may simply be understanding. Understanding how to unlock the full potential of a completely new package. And if Red Bull manages to solve that puzzle quickly, then the difficult first day in Melbourne could become something much more interesting. Not the beginning of a decline, but the beginning of another comeback. Because if there is one thing the Formula One paddock has learned over the past decade, it is that writing off Max Verstappen after a messy Friday is usually a very dangerous mistake. And that is where the story of this first day in Australia becomes even more interesting. Because while many fans only look at the timing screens on Friday, teams inside the paddock look at something completely different: the potential of the car. And according to several engineers studying the data from Albert Park, the RB22 might still have a very high ceiling. The design philosophy of this car is extremely aggressive. Red Bull built a very compact package around the new Ford power unit. The suspension layout has been completely reworked. And the aerodynamics remain as detailed as ever, with tiny elements across the bodywork designed to control airflow as efficiently as possible. The goal of that concept is simple: efficiency. In the new 2026 regulations, energy management is just as important as aerodynamic grip. Teams cannot simply add downforce without thinking about drag. Every extra bit of resistance on the straight costs electrical energy. And if the battery deployment runs out too early, the car becomes vulnerable before the end of the straight. That is why Red Bull focused so heavily on aerodynamic efficiency when designing the RB22. The car is built to produce clean downforce while maintaining strong straight-line speed. If that concept works the way the engineers expect, it could become extremely powerful once the team fully understands how to operate the new power unit. But that understanding takes time. And that is exactly what the first day in Melbourne revealed. Ferrari looked comfortable immediately. Mercedes looked very organized. McLaren surprised the paddock with impressive pace. Those teams appeared ready from the moment the cars left the garage. Red Bull looked different. Not slow, but unfinished. A car with enormous potential, still searching for its ideal setup. And that might actually make the championship even more dangerous for everyone else. Because Red Bull has built a reputation for developing faster than almost anyone on the grid. If the RB22 already sits within reach of the leaders despite a chaotic first day, then the moment the team unlocks the correct balance, the entire competitive order could change again. And that is the final piece of the story Max Verstappen revealed after the first day in Australia.